Why would a human risk everything for a creature he'd never seen before? That's what Lieutenant Kaela thought as she watched the human's hand shoot out, gripping her blade mid-swing during what should have been a routine combat drill. The training ground had fallen silent. Every soldier in the formation stood frozen, their luminescent eyes wide with shock as Marcus Chen, the first human to ever join the Veloran Defense Academy, positioned himself between Kaela's sword and a trembling six-legged cub that had wandered onto the practice field. The creature was a Kalthara, barely 3 months old, its silver fur matted with dust as it cowered against the barrier wall. Protocol was clear. During live blade drills, nothing interrupted the exercise. Nothing. Especially not for an animal that had breached the perimeter. Kaela's people had built their civilization on discipline, on the unwavering commitment to duty above all else. For 12,000 cycles, the Velorans had survived in a hostile galaxy because they never hesitated, never faltered, never let emotion compromise their precision. But this human was gripping her blade with his bare hand, blood already seeping between his fingers, his brown eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made something strange flutter in her chest. "Move," Kaela commanded, her voice carrying the authority of her rank, despite the confusion surging through her. Marcus didn't move. "It's a baby," he said simply, as if those 3 words explained everything, justified everything, made throwing away months of training and risking disciplinary action somehow reasonable. Kaela's pointed ears twitched with frustration, the only outward sign of the turmoil brewing inside her. She was the Academy's top student, destined for command, the daughter of a decorated general who had never once questioned an order. And now this human, this outsider from a species so new to the galactic community they were barely more than curiosities, was making her look weak in front of her entire unit. "That creature violated a training zone during a live drill," Kaela stated, her platinum hair catching the dual sun's light as she maintained her stance. "Regulations demand we eliminate any variables that could compromise the exercise. Your interference is noted and will be reported." She tried to pull her blade back, but Marcus's grip held firm. His hand had to be screaming in pain, yet his face showed only determination. "Then report that I couldn't stand by and watch something helpless die for the sake of a training exercise," he replied, his voice steady despite the blood now dripping onto the sand. Behind them, Instructor Vorik approached, his massive frame casting a shadow over the scene. Kaela's heart sank. Vorik was old guard, a veteran of the border wars, someone who viewed the human exchange program as a political inconvenience, at best, and a dangerous weakening of military standards at worst. "Cadet Chen," Vorik's voice rumbled like distant thunder. "You have violated 3 regulations in the span of 10 seconds. Explain yourself." Marcus finally released Kaela's blade, but he didn't step aside. Instead, he knelt, positioning himself as a shield between the cub and everyone else. "Sir, I understand I've broken protocol, but where I come from, how we treat the helpless says everything about who we are. This cub didn't choose to be here. It's scared and alone. I can't just pretend that doesn't matter." The training ground remained deathly quiet. Kaela found herself studying the human's profile as he gently extended his uninjured hand toward the trembling cub. She'd been assigned as Marcus's integration partner when he'd arrived 6 weeks ago, responsible for helping him adjust to Veloran military culture. In that time, she'd found him frustrating, inefficient, and bafflingly emotional. He questioned orders that seemed perfectly logical to her. He formed attachments to support staff and maintenance workers, learning their names and asking about their lives. He spent his free time in the archives, not studying tactical manuals like a proper cadet, but reading Veloran poetry and history, trying to understand her people beyond their military doctrine. She'd written in her reports that while Marcus showed promising physical aptitude, his emotional decision-making posed a liability. Yet now, watching him coax the frightened cub with soft sounds and patient movements, Kaela felt something crack in the certainty she'd always carried. The cub's fear-glazed eyes began to focus on Marcus. It took one hesitant step forward, then another. "What you call liability, I call humanity," Marcus murmured, whether to her or Vorik or himself, Kaela couldn't tell. The cub pressed its small head against Marcus's palm, and he smiled with such genuine warmth that Kaela's breath caught. When had she last smiled like that? When had anyone she knew smiled like that? The answer came quickly and uncomfortably. Never. Velorans didn't waste energy on excessive emotional displays. Efficiency, precision, duty, those were the pillars of their society. But suddenly, watching this human cradle, an animal that by all rights meant nothing to him, those pillars felt less like strength and more like walls. Cadet Kaela, Vorik said, startling her from her thoughts. Retrieve the creature and return it to the nature preserve beyond the southern perimeter. Then escort Cadet Chen to medical for treatment, and subsequently to my office for disciplinary review. He turned to address the assembled soldiers. The rest of you, formation drills until I return. Every second of this delay will be made up in additional conditioning. As Vorik strode away and the other cadets reluctantly resumed their exercises, Kaela stood frozen, unsure how to proceed. In all her tactical training, no one had prepared her for how to carry a cub or deal with a human who insisted on bleeding for animals. Marcus carefully scooped up the small creature, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his injured hand, then offered the cub to Kaela. Here, you should take it. Vorik said you should return it to the preserve. Up close, the cub was admittedly adorable, its 6 legs tucked against its body and its large eyes blinking slowly. Kaela had seen Kelthoris before, of course. They were common in the wilderness areas surrounding the academy. But she'd never held one, never noticed the way their fur seemed to shimmer with an iridescent quality, never felt the rapid patter of a tiny heartbeat against her palms. It's warm, she said stupidly, immediately regretting the observation. Marcus's smile turned gentle, understanding in a way that made her want to simultaneously trust him and push him away. Life usually is. They walked together toward the southern perimeter, leaving the sounds of drill practice behind them. Marcus's blood left occasional drops on the path, and Kaela found herself irrationally angry at him for injuring himself, at herself for following protocol so rigidly, at their entire culture for creating a situation where protecting something innocent was considered a violation. Why did you really do it? She asked, when they were far enough from the training ground that no one would overhear. The truth, you had to know it would cause problems. Marcus was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. When I was 8 years old, I found a bird with a broken wing in my backyard. My father said nature would take its course, that interfering was pointless because the bird would probably die anyway. But I couldn't accept that. I spent 3 weeks caring for it, feeding it, keeping it safe. And yeah, my father was right. The bird died anyway. He paused, his voice dropping. But for those 3 weeks, it wasn't alone. It wasn't suffering. And when it finally passed, it was peaceful. That mattered to me. It still matters to me. Maybe I can't save everything, or fix everything, but I can choose not to add to the suffering in the universe. I can choose to be someone who steps in rather than someone who looks away. Kaela felt something tight in her chest loosen and tighten simultaneously. That's incredibly inefficient thinking, she said, but the words lacked her usual conviction. Probably, Marcus agreed easily. But maybe efficiency isn't the only measure of worth. They reached the preserve boundary, a shimmering energy barrier that kept the wildlife contained while allowing authorized personnel to pass. Kaela adjusted her biometric signature to include Marcus temporarily, and they stepped through into a world that seemed entirely separate from the rigid order of the academy. Trees with azure bark reached toward the purple-tinged sky, their leaves chiming softly in the breeze. The air smelled of growing things, of life unfurling according to its own timeline rather than a scheduled drill. Kaela knelt and gently placed the cub on the soft moss carpeting the forest floor. It looked at her with what she could swear was gratitude before scampering off into the underbrush, already calling out with small chirping sounds that were answered by deeper calls in the distance. Its family. It had been looking for its family. Lieutenant? Marcus's voice pulled her attention. He'd grown pale, and fresh blood was dripping more steadily from his hand. The adrenaline of the confrontation must be wearing off, allowing pain and shock to settle in. Your hand, Kaela said, moving to him quickly. You need medical attention now. But when she took his injured hand in hers to examine the wound, Marcus's eyes met hers with an expression that made everything else fade into background noise. Was it worth it? She asked softly. Would you do it again, knowing the cost? Every single time, he answered without hesitation. Something fundamental shifted in Kaela's understanding of the universe in that moment. She'd been taught that strength meant never wavering, never doubting, never allowing compassion to override logic. But looking at this human who'd risked so much for so little tactical gain, she saw a different kind of strength entirely. The kind that admitted fear and acted anyway. The kind that acknowledged pain and chose kindness regardless. The kind that said some things mattered more than protocol, more than efficiency, more than the safe distance her people kept from everything messy and emotional and real. "We need to get you to medical," she said, but she didn't let go of his hand. They walked back through the preserve, through the barrier, across the academy grounds to the medical center. Kaela's mind raced the entire way. She was going to have to explain this to Vorik, to her commanding officers, possibly to her father. Her spotless record now had a mark on it simply by association. The logical choice would be to distance herself from Marcus, to emphasize in her reports that she'd followed orders, while he'd been the one to break protocol. But when the medic finished treating Marcus's hand, wrapping it in regenerative bandaging that would heal the wound within days, Kaela found herself accompanying him to Vorik's office rather than returning to training. She didn't have to be there. Her orders had been to escort him to medical, nothing more. Yet here she was, standing beside him as he knocked on the instructor's door. "Enter," Vorik's voice commanded. The office was exactly what Kaela had expected. Efficient, organized, decorated only with commendations and tactical displays. Vorik sat behind his desk, his expression unreadable as he gestured for them to stand before him. "Cadet Chen, I've reviewed the incident reports from 11 other cadets who witnessed your actions. All confirm that you willfully interrupted a training exercise, disregarded a direct order to move, and physically interfered with a superior officer's weapon during a live drill." Vorik's luminescent eyes, a pale gold that came with age and experience, fixed on Marcus. Any one of these violations would warrant severe disciplinary action. Combined, they could end your placement here permanently. "Speak." Marcus stood straight, his bandaged hand held carefully at his side. "Sir, I accept full responsibility for my actions. I broke protocol, and I disrupted the training exercise. I don't ask for leniency, but I do want to be clear that I would make the same choice again. I couldn't stand by and watch something helpless be harmed when I had the ability to prevent it. If that makes me unsuitable for the Veloran Defense Academy, then I'm unsuitable. But I won't apologize for choosing compassion." Kaela's heart hammered in her chest. She'd expected Marcus to show contrition, to try to minimize the incident. Instead, he was doubling down, practically daring Vorik to dismiss him. Before Vorik could respond, Kaela heard herself speaking. "Sir, request permission to address the incident." Vorik's attention shifted to her, one eyebrow raising slightly. "You have something to add, Lieutenant?" Everything Kaela had been taught screamed at her to step back, to protect her record, to distance herself from this disaster. But she thought about the cub's frightened eyes, about the warmth of life in her hands, about Marcus's unwavering conviction that some things mattered more than rules. "I do, sir. In the 6 weeks I've served as Cadet Chen's integration partner, I've documented what I termed emotional liability in my reports. But today's incident has caused me to reconsider that assessment." She took a breath, aware that every word would be recorded, would become part of her permanent file. "Our protocols exist to maintain efficiency and discipline. But perhaps there's value in remembering why we have military strength in the first place. We defend our people, our civilization, our way of life. But what is that life worth if we lose the ability to recognize when our protocols serve us and when they simply make us efficient at being cruel?" Vorik's expression remained neutral, but Kaela saw his fingers tap once against his desk, a tiny tell she'd learned meant he was genuinely considering something. "An interesting perspective, Lieutenant. Are you suggesting we abandon military discipline in favor of emotional decision-making?" "No, sir," Kaela replied quickly. "I'm suggesting that we remember discipline is a tool, not an end unto itself. Cadet Chen's actions today prevented a necessary death during an exercise. The cub's presence was unusual, but posed no actual threat to the drill's objectives. Eliminating it would have been efficient, yes, but it would also have been wasteful and, I believe, counter to the values we claim to uphold. The Veloran Code states that we are guardians of civilization. That should include guarding life when possible, not just following protocols blindly." The silence that followed felt eternal. Vorik studied them both, his aged eyes seeming to look past their uniforms to something deeper. Finally, he spoke. 340 cycles ago, I was leading a patrol through hostile territory. We encountered a settlement of refugees, civilians fleeing a conflict that wasn't even their own. Our mission parameters were clear. Maintain stealth, avoid engagement, complete reconnaissance, and return. These refugees were a complication. They'd seen us, which compromised our stealth. They needed help, which would have delayed our mission. By every tactical measure, the efficient choice was to neutralize them and continue. Vork's voice grew quiet, heavy with memory. I gave the order to help them anyway. We spent 3 days getting those civilians to safety, completely abandoning our mission. I lost 2 good soldiers in the process. When we returned, I expected court-martial. Instead, my commanding officer told me something I've never forgotten. She said that the day our efficiency becomes more important than our honor is the day we stop deserving the power we wield. He stood, moving to the window that overlooked the training grounds, where cadets still ran through their drills with mechanical precision. Our society has become very good at being efficient, at following protocols, at maintaining order. Perhaps to good. Perhaps we've forgotten that these tools are meant to serve a greater purpose, not replace it. Turning back to Marcus and Kaela, Vork's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Cadet Chen, your actions today violated protocol. They also exemplified the very qualities we claim to value in our defenders: courage, moral conviction, the willingness to stand for what's right, even at personal cost. I'm officially reprimanding you for the protocol violations, which will be noted in your record. I'm also unofficially commending you for reminding this academy why we trained soldiers in the first place. Marcus looked stunned. Sir, thank you. Don't thank me yet, Vork said, with the ghost of a smile. Your punishment for disrupting the drill is to spend the next 30 days working in the preserve, helping our wildlife management team. Perhaps you can teach them some of your human compassion while learning some of our Veloran discipline. He shifted his gaze to Kaela. Lieutenant, your reassessment of Cadet Chen's qualities shows growth in your own judgment. However, supporting a subordinate who violated protocol requires that you share in the consequences. You'll accompany him to the preserve for those 30 days, assisting with the work while continuing your integration partnership duties. Kaela felt her ears twitch upward slightly, an involuntary expression of surprise, and she had to admit pleasure. 30 days working alongside Marcus, away from the rigid structure of constant drills and evaluations, actually sounded like the opposite of punishment. Yes, sir. Understood. As they left Vork's office, the dual suns were beginning their descent toward the horizon, painting the academy grounds in shades of amber and rose. Marcus let out a long breath, his shoulders dropping from their rigid attention stance. That went better than I expected, he admitted. Though I'm not sure if working in the preserve is supposed to be punishment or reward. Kaela found herself smiling, really smiling, for the first time she could remember. Maybe it's both. Maybe the point is to learn something. They walked together toward the cadet quarters, and Kaela noticed details she'd been too focused on efficiency to see before. The way the evening light made Marcus's features seem softer, more approachable. The careful way he moved his injured hand, still healing, but already improving. The quiet confidence in his stride that came not from arrogance, but from knowing exactly who he was and what he stood for. Marcus, she said, using his personal name rather than his rank for the first time. He looked at her with those warm brown eyes, and she felt her carefully constructed emotional barriers crack a little further. Thank you for what you did today. Not just for the CUB, but for making me question things I'd stopped questioning. His smile could have melted glaciers. That's what friends do, right? Challenge each other to be better? Friends. Such a simple word, but one that carried weight in Veloran culture. Her people didn't form friendships easily, preferring professional relationships built on mutual efficiency rather than emotional connection. But standing there in the fading light with this impossible human who'd risked everything for a frightened animal, Kaela realized she wanted that. Wanted connection. Wanted to know what it felt like to care about someone not because of their tactical value, but simply because they mattered. Yes, she said softly. That's what friends do. The next morning, they reported to the preserve together. The wildlife management team consisted of 3 specialists who seemed genuinely delighted to have help, especially help that came with Vork's recommendation that they put the newcomers through rigorous learning experiences. For the first week, Kaela and Marcus worked on basic maintenance, repairing barrier sections, cleaning water sources, monitoring the health of various species that called the preserve home. It was physical work, often dirty and always exhausting. But Kaela found herself enjoying it in a way she'd never enjoyed military drills. There was immediacy to it, tangible results at the end of each day. They'd restored a habitat section, or treated an injured animal, or planted new vegetation to support the ecosystem. On the 8th day, they were tracking a family of Kelthoris, the same species as the cub Marcus had saved, to document their territorial range. The work required patience, silence, and careful observation. As they crouched behind a fallen tree, watching a mother Kelthara teach her cubs to forage, Marcus leaned close to Kaela and whispered, "Do you think that's the one? The cub from the drill?" Kaela studied the group. One of the cubs did seem to look their direction with particular interest, its head tilting as if in recognition. Possibly. They have strong memory for individuals who've shown them kindness. The cub in question suddenly bounded toward them, causing the mother to tense protectively. But when the small creature reached Marcus and began making happy chirping sounds while rubbing against his leg, the mother relaxed. It seemed even Kelthara mothers could recognize gratitude. Marcus gently scratched behind the cub's ears, his expression full of wonder. "Hey there, little one. You're looking good. Found your family okay?" Kaela watched the interaction, something warm and unfamiliar spreading through her chest. She'd been taught that emotional attachment was a weakness, that proper soldiers maintain professional distance from everyone and everything. But seeing Marcus's genuine joy, seeing the trust in the cub's eyes, she couldn't classify this as weakness. It looked like strength to her, now. Strength to remain open in a universe that often punished openness. Strength to care when detachment would be easier. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked, noticing her staring. Kaela almost deflected, almost gave a tactical non-answer about wildlife behavior patterns. But they were friends now, and friends deserved honesty. "I'm thinking about how much you've changed my perspective in such a short time. Before you arrived, I was certain about everything. Protocol was absolute. Efficiency was paramount. Emotion was liability. But now," she trailed off, struggling to articulate the fundamental shift happening inside her. "Now I'm not certain about anything, and somehow that feels more honest than all my previous certainty." Marcus's hand found hers, his fingers warm and slightly rough from physical work. The touch sent electricity through her nervous system, making her luminescent eyes brighten involuntarily. "Uncertainty means you're growing," he said gently. "It means you're willing to question and evolve. That takes real courage, Kaela. More courage than following the path you've always known." They sat there in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the Kelthara family play in the dappled sunlight filtering through the azure trees. It was a moment of perfect peace, the kind Kaela had never allowed herself to experience before. Because peace wasn't efficient, wasn't productive, wasn't part of her carefully scheduled existence. She realized now what she'd been missing. Not just peace, but connection. Not just efficiency, but meaning. The remaining weeks in the preserve passed too quickly. Kaela and Marcus fell into an easy rhythm, working alongside each other during the days and talking late into the evenings about everything and nothing. He told her about Earth, about cities that never slept, and oceans so vast they seemed infinite. She told him about Velora's moons, about the singing crystals in the northern mountains that her grandmother had taken her to see once, a rare moment of beauty prioritized over duty. Their conversations wandered from philosophy to jokes to comfortable silence. Kaela found herself laughing more than she had in years, found herself looking forward to each day, not because of what she'd accomplish, but because of who she'd spend it with. She caught herself studying Marcus when he wasn't looking, noticing small things. The way he unconsciously hummed while working, the focused expression he got when solving problems, the kindness in every interaction, whether with animals or the preserve staff or her. On the 28th day of their assignment, they were called to assist with a difficult situation. A young Kelthara had become tangled in old barrier wire someone had improperly disposed of years ago. The creature was panicking, injuring itself further with each struggle. "We need to sedate it," one of the specialists said, preparing a tranquilizer. "It's too dangerous to approach while it's thrashing like that." But Marcus was already moving forward, his voice dropping into those same soothing tones he'd used with the cub during the drill. "Hey, it's okay. We're going to help you. I know you're scared, but you need to trust me." Kaela held her breath as Marcus knelt beside the thrashing Kelthara, well within range of its sharp claws. This was insane. This was dangerous. This was exactly the kind of thing Marcus would do, and she was absolutely going to help him do it. She moved to his side, adding her voice to his, and together they calmed the frightened animal enough to carefully cut away the wire. It took 20 minutes of patient work, both of them sustaining minor scratches, but finally the Kelthara was free. It stood on shaky legs, looked at them both with those expressive eyes, and gently pressed its head against Kaela's shoulder before lopping off into the forest. The preserve specialist who'd suggested sedation stared at them in amazement. I've been doing this for 15 cycles, and I've never seen anyone calm a distressed Kelthara like that. How did you know it would work? Marcus and Kaela exchanged a look, and she saw her own understanding reflected in his eyes. Sometimes you just have to trust that choosing compassion will work out, Marcus said simply. That evening, their last before returning to regular academy duties, Kaela and Marcus sat on an observation platform overlooking the preserve. The dual moons were rising, bathing everything in silver and pale blue light. I don't want to go back, Kaela admitted quietly. These past 30 days have been the best of my life, and I'm not ready for them to end. Marcus turned to her, his expression serious. They don't have to end. What we've found here, what we've learned about ourselves and each other, we can take that back with us. We can be different. We can make others different. It won't be easy, Kaela said. The academy, my career path, my family's expectations, they all require me to be who I was, not who I'm becoming. Nothing worthwhile is easy, Marcus countered. But you're not alone in this. We'll figure it out together. Kaela's hand found his again, that now familiar warmth spreading from the point of contact through her entire being. Together, she repeated, and it sounded like a promise. She leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling his arm wrap around her in response. And for the first time in her life, Kaela understood what it meant to be truly content. Not because everything was efficient or scheduled or controlled, but because she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly who she was meant to be with. The universe was vast and often harsh, but it also held moments like this. Moments worth every risk, every broken protocol, every challenge to certainty. When they returned to the academy the next day, word of their preserve assignment had spread. Some cadets viewed it as punishment and gave them pitying looks, others seemed curious about what they'd learned. A few, Kaela noticed, looked at Marcus with new respect, as if his willingness to face consequences for his convictions had elevated him from curiosity to someone worth emulating. Vorik called them both to his office one final time. Your preserve supervisor submitted glowing reports, he said, actual approval in his voice. She indicated that you both demonstrated exceptional skill in wildlife management, genuine dedication to the work, and a collaborative partnership that achieved results beyond expectations. He paused, his ancient eyes twinkling with something that might have been amusement. She's also requested that you both continue working in the preserve 1 day per week, even while resuming your regular training schedule. She seems to think you have natural talent for conservation work. Kaela felt excitement bubble up. Sir, we'd be honored to continue. I thought you might say that. Vorik handed them updated schedules that incorporated preserve duty alongside their combat training, tactical studies, and other requirements. Cadet Chen, your integration period is officially complete. You've proven yourself capable of adapting to Veloran military standards while maintaining your own identity. You're hereby promoted from cadet to junior officer, same rank as Lieutenant Kaela. Marcus's eyes widened. Sir, I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep being exactly who you are, Vorik replied. Keep questioning when questioning is warranted. Keep showing compassion when compassion is needed. Keep reminding us that protocol serves purpose, not the other way around. And keep challenging Lieutenant Kaela to grow beyond the limitations her previous certainty placed on her. After they left Vorik's office, both of them slightly dazed by the turn their lives had taken, Marcus stopped in the corridor and turned to Kaela. So, junior officers get their own quarters, right? Private space? Kaela nodded, unsure where he was going with this. Then I suppose we won't have as many excuses to spend time together. We'll have to be intentional about it. His smile turned mischievous. Are you asking me on a date, Cadet Chen? Sorry, Junior Officer Chen? Kaela's ears twitched upward with pleasure. I believe I am, Lieutenant Kaela. There's a place I mentioned once, the Singing Crystals in the Northern Mountains. I'd like to show you. If you're interested in seeing more of Velora beyond training grounds and preserves, I'm interested in seeing everything, Marcus said, and Kaela knew he meant more than just landscapes. He meant culture, history, her world, her life. He wanted to know all of it, all of her, and she wanted to share it with him. More than that, she wanted to see Earth through his eyes, to understand the world that had created someone capable of such immediate, unflinching compassion. As they walked through the academy grounds together, Kaela reflected on how much had changed since that drill just over a month ago. A frightened cub, a split-second decision, a human who valued life over protocol, and suddenly her entire worldview had shifted. She'd spent her whole life building walls of efficiency and emotional distance, certain they made her strong. Marcus had shown her that real strength meant knowing when to maintain those walls and when to tear them down. It meant having principles that mattered more than advancement, caring about things that served no tactical purpose, choosing kindness even when cruelty would be easier. That evening, as news spread that the human cadet had been promoted to junior officer, several other cadets approached Marcus with questions. What was Earth like? How did human military training compare to Veloran methods? Was it true he'd worked with Caltharus and could calm them without sedation? Kaela watched him answer each question with patience and genuine interest, never making anyone feel foolish for their curiosity. He was building bridges, one conversation at a time, showing through his actions that different perspectives could coexist and even strengthen each other. One cadet, a young male named Torin, who Kaela knew, struggled with the academy's rigid expectations, asked quietly, "Is it true you stopped a drill to save an animal? And they promoted you anyway?" Marcus glanced at Kaela before answering. "It's true, I stopped a drill. But I didn't do it thinking about promotions or consequences. I did it because it was right. Sometimes that's all the reason you need," Torin's expression suggested. He was turning that statement over in his mind, examining it from every angle. "But what if what's right isn't what's ordered?" "Then you have a difficult choice to make," Marcus acknowledged. "And you have to be willing to accept the consequences of that choice." "But I believe that a military that punishes people for choosing compassion over blind obedience isn't a military worth serving. Fortunately, I don't think that's what the Veloran Defense Force is." Even if it sometimes forgets that. Later that night, alone in her quarters, Kaela pulled up the recording from that drill day that had changed everything. Academy protocols meant all training exercises were documented, and she'd never actually watched the footage. Now she studied it with new eyes, seeing the moment from outside her own limited perspective. There was Marcus, seeing the cub cornered against the wall, her blade descending according to protocol, his instant decision to intervene. But what caught her attention was something she hadn't noticed in the chaos of the moment. Just before Marcus moved, there was a fraction of a second where he'd looked at her, not at the blade, not at the cub, but directly at her eyes. And in that fragment of time, his expression had been pleading. He hadn't just been trying to save the cub from her blade. He'd been trying to save her from making a choice she'd have to live with forever. He'd known somehow that killing something helpless would haunt her eventually, even if she didn't realize it in the moment. He'd stepped between the blade and the cub, yes, but he'd also stepped between her and a future where she'd become so rigid in her adherence to protocol that she'd lost her own soul. Kaela felt tears, an emotional response Velorans were taught to suppress, slide down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. They felt honest. They felt earned. The door chime sounded, and she quickly composed herself before answering. Marcus stood in the corridor, looking uncertain. "Sorry. I know it's late. I just wanted to check if you were okay. You seemed quiet after the promotion ceremony." Instead of answering, Kaela pulled him into her quarters and wrapped her arms around him, holding him close in a way her people never did. Expressing emotion, her culture considered inefficient. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder, "for saving me that day. Not just from making a terrible choice, but from a life where I never questioned whether my choices were worth making." Marcus's arms encircled her, strong and steady and safe. "You saved yourself, Kaela. I just gave you a reason to look at things differently." Everything after that, every choice to grow and change and become more than what was expected of you, that was all you. They stood like that for a long moment. Two people from different worlds who'd found something universal in each other: compassion, understanding, the courage to be vulnerable. When they finally pulled apart, Kaela kept hold of Marcus's hand, unwilling to completely break the connection. "Stay," she said simply. "We can start planning our trip to the Singing Crystals. And I want to hear more about Earth's oceans. And maybe just sit quietly together. I don't have an efficient reason for it. I just want you here." Marcus's smile was brighter than both of Velora's moons. That's the best invitation I've ever received. They spent the night talking and planning and simply existing in each other's company. Two junior officers who'd learned that the strongest protocols were the ones you chose for yourself. The ones that said compassion mattered, that life had value beyond tactical significance, that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was step between something helpless and harm, regardless of the cost. Outside, the academy continued its endless cycle of drills and training, preparing soldiers for a hostile galaxy. But inside Kaela's quarters, something else was being prepared. A future where efficiency served compassion rather than replacing it, where protocols enhanced judgment rather than overriding it, where a human and a Veloran proved that the best of both their worlds could create something neither had imagined alone. And it all started because a cub was cornered during a drill, and a human stepped between it and the blade, changing two lives and countless others in ways that would ripple forward through time. Some people measure impact in tactical victories or strategic achievements. But Marcus and Kaela had learned to measure it in moments of connection, in choices that honored life, in the quiet certainty that they'd found in each other something worth protecting at any cost. The singing crystals could wait. Earth's oceans could wait. Right now, this moment was enough. This connection was everything. And tomorrow, they'd wake up and continue changing their corner of the galaxy, one compassionate choice at a time, together.